Northanger Abbey, Jane Austen's earliest completed novel, revolves around the story of Catherine Morland, a heroine whom the narrator memorably introduces by declaring, "No one who had ever seen her in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine." Catherine, at first glance, does not appear to possess many heroic qualities. She is an inexperienced young woman who benefits from neither an elite family heritage, nor aristocratic training, nor extensive formal education, nor stunning beauty. Throughout her travels to Bath and then Northanger, Austen exposes Catherine's ignorance, including her lack of knowledge about human relationships, people's motivations, intellectual ideas, and the transmission of information. Catherine's ignorance is no doubt amusing, but for a young woman learning to navigate society, new friends, male suitors, and other challenges of public life, her ignorance is also dangerous, embarrassing, at times painful, even shameful. Catherine is most assuredly not the only ignorant character in Northanger Abbey, a story deeply indebted to the tradition of the Gothic novel, replete with its unsuspected terrors, villains, and mysteries. As Austen narrates her adventures, the heroine meets and interacts with various individuals who, despite their ignorances, announce, share, or affect knowledge. Perhaps no character in Austen's corpus exemplifies such behavior quite so well as the obnoxious John Thorpe, a school friend of Catherine's brother James and the sibling of Isabella Thorpe, the heroine's new friend in Bath. During one of Catherine's early encounters with John Thorpe, she discusses her love of novels and especially her fondness for Anne Radcliffe's Mysteries of Udolpho. The bombastic Thorpe asserts, "Udolpho? Oh Lord, not I. I never read novels. I have something else to do." Austen immediately narrates, Catherine, humbled and ashamed, was going to apologize for her question, but he prevented her by saying, "Novels are so full of nonsense and stuff. There has not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones, except The Monk. I read that the other day, but as far as all the others, they are the stupidest things in creation." Despite Thorpe's arrogant dismissal, Catherine persists and advises, "I think you must like Udolpho, if you were to read it. It is so very interesting." But Thorpe has no patience for the young heroine's book recommendations and rather aggressively dismisses her. "Not I, Faith. No. If I read any, it shall be Mrs. Radcliffe's. Her novels are amusing enough, they are worth reading. Some fun and nature in them." Austen's heroine simply responds, "Udolpho was written by Mrs. Radcliffe." And the narrator immediately notes that she says this with some hesitation from the fear of mortifying him. This early exchange between Catherine Morland and John Thorpe is both comic and revealing. Thorpe's arrogance is overbearing and serves to intimidate many, including young women, but it also exposes his ignorance. He lacks fundamental knowledge about the popular Gothic romance, fails to understand influential relationships between the novels he supposedly likes and those he dubs the stupidest things in creation, and makes excessively critical comments about the Mysteries of Udolpho without realizing that The Mysteries of Udolpho was written by Anne Radcliffe, an author whose novels he acknowledges are amusing enough and worth reading. Thorpe models the behavior of arrogant, brash men who denigrate, shun, or even attempt to silence smart, curious, and precocious young women. He boldly declares knowledge and certainty, and he appears foolish, as he does throughout Northanger Abbey, inviting scorn from readers and creating an awkward situation for Catherine. When Thorpe speaks with such authority, Catherine must determine if and how to respond. She does hesitate, and it's striking that, according to Austen, the heroine's hesitation derives from her fear of mortifying Thorpe. Austen often reminds us of the complexities young women negotiate when they challenge the claims of powerful men, and in this moment of hesitation, Catherine appears to consider whether to share her knowledge or remain reticent. Perhaps she hesitates to evaluate the consequences of correcting Thorpe as opposed to the benefits of remaining quiet. Perhaps she does not want to embarrass her brother's friend publicly. Perhaps, as a young woman, she is fearful of how Thorpe might react when she exposes his ignorance about Gothic literature. Perhaps Thorpe's proclamations prompt her to doubt her own knowledge. All these possibilities suggest both Catherine's recognition of ignorance, its ramifications, and the potentially discomforting, even dangerous ramifications of her knowledge. Catherine does respond to Thorpe's ignorant statement, in spite of her fear, and as she progresses through the novel and evaluates the deficient, inaccurate, or incomplete knowledge of other people she meets, she also comes to terms with her own ignorances. She acknowledges her misunderstandings and mistakes, and she discovers the risks of becoming knowledgeable. Catherine learns. She develops more complex understandings of individuals, of ideas, of human relationships, and of knowledge itself by experiencing new situations and engaging with new people. This process is no doubt challenging and often quite amusing. At various points in the novel, Catherine's ignorance leads to hazards and humiliations, but she does persist, and she learns, even when such moments as this exchange with Thorpe prompt her to feel humbled and ashamed, or compelled to apologize for her questions, or become frightened or hesitant to confront, dispute, or share ideas with arrogant men. Northanger Abbey is a novel that invites us to think about how we learn, how we determine ideas, arrive at supposed certainty, and share information. My colleagues and I in higher education often remind students that knowledge is a process. It takes time and is rarely linear. We know this. And while the very notion of the learning process may have become something of a hackneyed idea, I still think it's true. We learn and grow in knowledge through both iterative and recursive processes, in college and throughout our lives. It's rarely simple and always has consequences. And again, this takes time. In this episode of Jane Austen and the Future of the Humanities, I consider Northanger Abbey to explore how these processes of developing knowledge inevitably involve ignorance, a necessary step in coming to knowledge. As we acquire knowledge, we confront and work through our ignorances, and we learn to evaluate sources of information, systems of data, and claims of authority. The very concept of ignorance has something of a bad reputation, both in and out of higher education, a reputation that I want to try to rehabilitate or at least complicate. Nobody wants to be dubbed ignorant, and yet we all are. It's part of the process. John Thorpe aggressively touts knowledge he lacks, speaks with sweeping authority, and presents his ideas as certain and indisputable. His arrogance prevents him from recognizing the current limitations of his knowledge and the opportunities to expand his thinking, most prominently by listening to and learning from others who may know more, including young women. Catherine, too, is ignorant, in this moment and throughout the novel. In this episode, we will discuss various situations in which Austen dramatizes Catherine's ignorance and her subsequent embarrassment, pain, shame, and learning processes. At this early moment in the novel, Austen makes clear that ignorance has consequences, and so does knowledge. Both can be dangerous, and I want to highlight the integral link between knowledge and ignorance. a link that coursework in the Humanities models and helps us to appreciate. My name is Michael Cramp, and I'm a faculty member in the English department at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And ever since I read Jane Austen at age 18, I have been pretty much enamored of her narratives, her characters, and her ideas. While many are repeatedly drawn to Austen for her famous stories of romance or the quaint settings of her fiction or her wonderfully witty language, I have found myself returning to Austen as both a scholar and a fan because of the ways in which she treats cultures, people, families, communities, relationships, and other human phenomena as complex realities that merit and in turn invite careful, considered, and continual thinking. Austen invites us to keep thinking and keep learning. As I suggested earlier, Northanger Abbey is a novel about thinking, about knowledge, how we learn, our sources of information, the inevitable limitations of our knowledge of the world and those around us, and the potential dangers of ignorance and knowledge. Dr. Claudia L. Johnson, the Murray Professor of English at Princeton University, discussed with me how Austen's novel treats ignorance and knowledge within the context of Gothic storytelling traditions.
I do believe that Northanger Abbey is a Gothic novel, although it comes across as an anti-Gothic novel. It finally confirms a Gothic novel. And in Gothic novels, the acquisition of knowledge is always painful. And that's in part because what it is you have to learn is really unnerving. So that the adventure from ignorance to knowledge is also an adventure from trust and naivete to suspicion and reticence.
As Catherine learns more about the people and spaces of Bath and Northanger, the motivations and actions of her friends and acquaintances, and the inadequacies of her own mind, or at least the current inadequacies of her own mind, she, and perhaps just as importantly, we as readers, recognize the risks integral to the processes of becoming knowledgeable, as well as the uneasiness, even distress, of some knowledge. As Dr. Johnson notes, this is part of the Gothic tradition that prompts us to become skeptical, suspicious, at times reticent, and it's part of learning. Education can be a dangerous activity. When we go to school, we inevitably discover people, ideas, and possibilities that unsettle us. Some of these experiences anger us, some excite us, some frustrate us, some alter us irrevocably. It happens. As we navigate such experiences, we also navigate our ignorances. As young students, we enter college and universities with vast ignorance. We fundamentally lack knowledge, and that's, of course, why we go to school. Students' abilities to work through their ignorances, identify ignorance, navigate challenging, even painful situations, and persistently ask questions are vital to their knowledge acquisition processes. Based on my 30 years' experience in higher education, I can say with confidence that successful students, and successful faculty members, by the way, learn to practice intellectual humility, to recognize the vast knowledges available to them, to engage the diversity of these kinds of knowledge, to evaluate sources and origins of information, and to come to appreciate their own intelligences and ignorances. I discussed Northanger Abbey and these issues of ignorance and intellectual humility with Francine Matthews, who wrote a long-standing Jane Austen mystery series under the name Stephanie Barron.
I think that there's been an explosion in our time of the need to appear competent to avoid humiliation. And I think that that has, as its correlation, a loss of humility in our personal experiences. That people rarely see humility which is a form of acknowledging ignorance as a value. Humility requires confessing ignorance, in my view. And people do that less and less. We all do that less and less. And it's partly because we're on screen more and more. So if you see yourself as performing on screen, whether it's on Facebook or TikTok or just in print, on X, you want to be unassailable. And that impulse springs from the fact that we are all attacked constantly on social media because it's so cost-free to be attacked now. And so nobody wants to appear vulnerable through ignorance. So we protect ourselves all the time. We are all unassailable.
As we begin our discussion of ignorance and the risks of knowledge, I think it's helpful to reflect on Matthew's comments on how social media has affected our sense of humility, our willingness to acknowledge ignorance, and ultimately our capacity to learn from one another. In our time of omnipresent social media and quick-triggered political extremism, we no doubt have a tendency to perform or affect knowledge, to conceal our ignorances and protect our vulnerabilities. And as Matthews notes, such performances inhibit learning. In today's episode, we discuss the first of what I'm calling humanities experiences that the stories and ideas of Jane Austen help us to understand and value. I am deliberately avoiding terms like skills, outcomes, and techniques because I want to highlight the enduring versatility of what we learn in the humanities. Northanger Abbey demonstrates the integral role of ignorance in the knowledge acquisition process. We are all ignorant. When we try to mask our ignorance or affect knowledge, as John Thorpe does, we thwart our learning, inhibit collaboration, share inaccurate information, and prevent the honest exchange of ideas, all of which are potentially quite dangerous. When we acknowledge our ignorance, or when our ignorances become exposed, we show vulnerabilities, leave ourselves open to critique, and often become embarrassed. Again, all of these possible results are risky. But ignorance is an essential feature of the knowledge acquisition process. It's all part of the experience. Knowledge can be a perilous process, even painful and unnerving. Ignorance is a key part of the dangerous business of becoming knowledgeable. A word or two on my method. As the podcast continues, I will be pairing different humanities experiences with each of Austen's 6 completed novels. Before we enter into these specific conversations, I want to make clear that I have no interest in claiming any kind of unique relationship between any of these experiences and a series of specific academic disciplines in what we call the humanities. In all honesty, I think the very concept of uniqueness is vastly overrated and most assuredly overstated. Various academic disciplines and intellectual fields undoubtedly help us to appreciate knowledge processes and the role of ignorance in these processes. This is, for example, integral to the scientific method and a basic component of empiricism. My suspicion is that we will be able to make similar claims about the other humanities experiences that we will discuss later in the podcast. I think this is both predictable and good. As we proceed, I don't want to speak about the humanities from a position of defensiveness or competition. I don't want to try to protect turf or entrench boundaries. I'm tired of such rhetoric, and I'm convinced that it has failed the humanities. Jane Austen helps us to appreciate the value of the humanities, and I imagine we could make similar arguments about other disciplines. I'm fine with that. Let's keep thinking and keep learning. One final prefatory word on method. I think it's worth noting that plenty of John Thorpes hang out at colleges and universities. Plenty of arrogant professors, administrators, or even students tout knowledge or cling to limited knowledge, seeking to impress or intimidate others. And we know very well that this behavior and various other experiences on college campuses prompt many to endure symptoms of the imposter syndrome. Not surprisingly, the least privileged of our colleagues at universities, people of color, first-generation students, the LGBTQ+ community, and precocious women like Catherine Moreland are the most likely to experience the imposter syndrome and develop doubts about whether they belong at university. This affects their abilities to interact with others, trust their knowledge and ideas, and challenge authority, especially the authority of overly assertive men. I spoke with Dr. Lee Michael George of the Geffen Academy at UCLA about this long-standing feature of academic culture.
In academia, I know one of my great fears is what holds me up sometimes is you feel like you have to know everything and you're scared of getting things wrong. And then I realized, sometimes academics do get things wrong. It's okay. It's okay.
As Dr. George makes clear, we know that academics and arrogant men like John Thorpe get things wrong. We also know that faculty and students alike can purport or affect knowledge that they do not have. We can cover up our ignorances, and such behavior may derive from fears of embarrassment or shame tied to the imposter syndrome, or such behavior may also indicate our ambitions or even our need to perform mastery, even elitist mastery of knowledge in front of others. The humanities are definitely not immune to such behavior, and I want to remind us of one of the ramifications of the recurrent chorus of the crisis of the humanities that I discussed in my first episode. My colleagues and I in the humanities have all too often exhibited elitist tendencies. We can speak and act with great authority, at times suggesting that few outside our scholarly communities can truly engage with our ideas. This elitism has certainly had detrimental effects on students and other colleagues. When I discussed Northanger Abbey with Dr. Patricia A. Matthew, faculty member at Montclair State University and founding director of the Race and Regency Lab, she commented on such elitist tendencies on college campuses and emphasized the experiences and knowledges of students.
I mean, I think to this idea of kind of scoffing when we encounter students who don't already know what we think they should know, I think that we end up missing what they bring that could actually help us see something in a new way.
As in all knowledge acquisition processes, we have opportunities to learn from diverse sources. Students, no doubt, bring different knowledges, experiences, and perspectives to college from which we all benefit. When faculty become defensive or frightened or competitive, we have a tendency to operate a bit like John Thorpe, ignoring or at times scoffing at students and their different knowledges and experiences. This is not a good thing. But I truly believe that intellectual humility is baked into the humanities. My colleagues, students, and I can be very good at embracing intellectual humility, and I think there are a few reasons for this. The disciplines of the humanities are old, and they have evolved. We are not as we once were. Knowledge changes, we adapt. As I discussed in the first episode, the methods of interrogation and bridging are central to the humanities. Students challenge and are challenged. We identify dissonances and we knit ideas together. These methods invite us to welcome and at times even require a diversity of thought and thinking. Indeed, I believe this feature of the humanities is a primary reason why our work, our classes, and our scholarship has come under attack in our politically extremist cultures. But in the humanities, we discover that one way or mode of thinking is simply insufficient. When we study the humanities, we come to recognize that what we do in one college class is intimately connected to what we study in another. We learn to ask questions about such connections, and as we consider different answers and possibilities, we learn to synthesize potential results, imagine future developments, and embrace the complexities of knowledge, even when such complexities are discomforting or unsettling. We navigate the dangers of learning, and the humanities, like Austen's Northanger Abbey, demonstrate the integral role of ignorance to the precarious knowledge production process. This episode is organized around 3 ways or experiences in which Austen showcases the integral role of ignorance in the knowledge acquisition process. And as Austen documents these experiences throughout Northanger Abbey, she reminds us of the dangers involved in becoming knowledgeable. We will consider Catherine's discovery of the hazards of men's attentions and their motivations, the novel's treatment of sources of information, the challenges of engaging and learning from different sources, and the risks of unreliable sources, and finally, the perils and possibilities of acting on suspicions or knowledge that we are still in the process of developing. Learning can be precarious, even risky. As Dr. Johnson reminds us, the knowledge we acquire in a Gothic novel like Northanger Abbey is unnerving, even painful. When we fail to embrace, navigate, and learn from our ignorances, we hinder our abilities to know, leaving us susceptible to various dangerous experiences, including the influences and actions of arrogant individuals like John Thorpe. I think it's safe to say that college and Bath would be a much better experience with fewer John Thorpes around. Let's turn our attention back to Catherine Morland and her processes of recognizing, as a young woman entering the public world for the first time, that the attentions of men can be dangerous. Prior to Catherine's travels to Bath, Austen provides a brief and amusing overview of the heroine's rather simple, even parochial upbringing. We learn that her heart was affectionate, her disposition cheerful and open, without conceit or affection of any kind, her manners just removed from the awkwardness and shyness of a girl, her person pleasing, and when in good looks, pretty, and her mind about as ignorant and uninformed as the female mind at 17 usually is. Austen's language is economical, humorous, and points to the heroine's readiness to learn. She is without conceit or affection and cheerful and open. She's also pretty and she's ignorant. This can be a dangerous combination for a young woman entering a new social scene, especially when she lacks good mentors. Early in her time in Bath, at the close of an evening of dancing and social interaction, Austen indicates that the company began to disperse and adds now was the time for a heroine who had not yet played a very distinguished part in the events of the evening to be noticed and admired. Austen's self-conscious narration reminds us of the Gothic conventions that frame her story and inform the experiences of her heroine. We learn how every 5 minutes, by removing some of the crowd, gave greater openings for her charms. And she was now seen by many young men who had not seen her before. Catherine recognizes this attention. She observes that she is being observed. And although Austen relates that not one man stared with rapturous wonder on beholding her, she was looked at, and with some admiration. No conventional hero is immediately overwhelmed upon beholding her, but she was looked at, and she even hears 2 gentlemen pronounce her to be a pretty girl. This scene dramatizes Catherine's early understandings of the attentions of men and their interests in young women. She does not speak or interact with the men who looked at her, but she hears them, and what she hears greatly affects her. Austen tells us that her heroine's humble vanity was contented. She felt more obliged to the 2 young men for this simple praise than a true quality heroine would have been for 15 sonnets in celebration of her charms. Catherine learns that these men look at her because they deem her to be a pretty girl. She identifies a causal connection, i.e., men's visual attention signals their admiration that alters her evaluation of the whole evening. And she felt obliged to these men. Austen's language invites us to question, does Catherine now feel an obligation to such men? When a man compliments a woman's appearance, even to another man, does this entitle him to something? Austen makes clear that Catherine likes this attention, but she does not fully understand how this process works. She is perfectly satisfied with her share of public attention. She appears to have no concerns or apprehensions about random, unidentified men visually admiring her and offering compliments. And she seems not to appreciate how such admiration could become unnerving, even threatening. She is, in short, ignorant of the potential dangers of men's attentions. Soon after this scene, the heroine's new friend, Isabella Thorpe, assures her that her brother, the arrogant John Thorpe, thought her the most charming girl in the world and engages her to dance with him that evening. Austen quickly explains that it requires uncommon steadiness of reason to resist the attraction of being called the most charming girl in the world. Steadiness of reason that Catherine lacks or is still developing. And the narrator details specific consequences of her ignorance and inexperience. When the heroine's brother, James, asks, "How do you like my friend Thorpe?" Austen relates that instead of answering, as she probably would have done had there been no friendship and no flattery in the case, "I do not like him at all," she directly replied, "I like him very much. He seems very agreeable." Catherine's behavior may remind us of a young college student who lacks the confidence and steadiness of reason to speak up in class, ask challenging questions, or refute a professor's statements. She knows that she does not like John Thorpe at all. And yet, perhaps she does not trust her knowledge, the data that she has collected, or the validity of her observations. Still, she does know that her knowledge would be unsettling and discomforting to her brother and friend. She has learned from her observations of Thorpe, the way he behaves, how he treats his sisters, and her own interactions with him. But she defers to those around her, and her decision not to share her knowledge accurately and honestly invites additional dangerous consequences of which she is, at this point in the story, ignorant. Soon after this moment, when Thorpe coerces Catherine to join him and others on an outing to Bristol, including the lure of visiting Blaise Castle, she learns more about the dangers of men who look at pretty girls and the risks of not trusting her mind. Thorpe persuades the heroine to join the party by convincing her that the Tilneys, with whom she had arranged to spend the day, have already left to pursue other plans. But as Thorpe transports Catherine in his carriage, the heroine realizes his deceptions. She observes the Tilneys and instructs, stop, I will get out this moment and go to them." Austen narrates, "But to what purpose did she speak? Thorpe only lashed his horse into a brisker trot." Catherine again speaks. Pray, stop, Mr. Thorpe. I cannot go on. I will not go on." Austen writes, "But Mr. Thorpe only laughed, smacked his whip, encouraged his horse, made odd noises, and drove on. And Catherine, angry and vexed as she was, having no power of getting away, was obliged to give up the point and submit." Austen's language is rather haunting, echoing words spoken by victims of assault and accentuating the very real dangers of which Catherine had been ignorant. Thorpe ignores her entreaties to stop, lashed his horse, and made odd noises. The heroine was obliged to give up the point and submit. Catherine did not know that Thorpe would or could behave in such a way. She did not know that a man's attention could lead him to ignore her requests, restrict her body, and compel her to submit. Her ignorance creates an extremely discomforting situation that numerous scholars have linked to the horrors of the Gothic. This is one of the many painful lessons that Catherine endures in Northanger Abbey. It's scary, unsettling, and traumatic. Catherine's process of becoming knowledgeable is sincerely painful, at times terrifying. And Austen also documents her heroine's ability to persist in learning, in coming to terms with her ignorances, and in managing potentially horrifying situations. She learns to distrust Thorpe, become skeptical about men's visual attentions, ask questions about their motivations, and develop the courage to trust her own ideas, observations, and beliefs. All of this, of course, is a process that is neither simple nor linear nor painless. When we learn, we do not merely add knowledge. Instead, these processes are inevitably recursive. We complicate, rethink, and build connections between various ideas, perspectives, and experiences. When Catherine later resists pressures from her companions to join them on a different expedition to Clifton, Thorpe again intervenes, sharing false information with the Tilneys so that Catherine might join them. This time, however, the heroine is firm and direct. This will not do. I cannot submit to this. I must run after Miss Tilney directly and set her right. Austen's narration is again rather haunting. Isabella caught hold of one hand, Thorpe of the other, and remonstrances poured in from all three. Her friends again try to contain her and restrict her movements. Catherine, however, is adamant. I will go after them. Wherever they are, I will go after them. If I could not be persuaded into doing what I thought wrong, I never will be tricked into it. Catherine is learning to trust her knowledge and beliefs, as well as the data from her own observations. She speaks with determination and assertiveness. She delineates clear actions, even if her words and actions may have some unfavorable consequences. Dr. George spoke with me about her admiration for Catherine's resiliency in the aftermath of mistakes and painful, traumatic learning experiences.
The one part that I really did want to think more about was how you talk about the painful experience when you discover you're wrong, because rereading the novel, I was just struck by how much Catherine Morland, even though she gets things wrong, to me it seems like she relatively quickly bounces back. Like she moves on, and I'm like, how do you do that, Catherine? Is it your youth? What is it about you? Because I feel in my own personal life, it sometimes takes me a long time to accept, to move on, to let it go. And I'm like, this is a wonderful lesson to learn from Catherine Morland. And she does it so many times. She makes so many mistakes.
Catherine's ignorance and mistakes about men's attentions are legitimately perilous. And as Austen makes clear, she has more to learn about men's attentions and motivations. Her knowledge acquisition process will and must continue. Like so many young women who have experienced the dangerous attentions of men, Catherine grows skeptical and cautious. And as we know, smart, cautious, and skeptical young women still endure the dangers of men's attentions and motivations. Austen dramatizes how her heroine becomes anxious about men's attentions, including the obsessive attentions of General Tilney, the father of her lover, and the inappropriate flirtations of his other son, Robert Tilney. She asks questions, she listens, and she shares ideas and suspicions, even when such ideas are wrong, or her suspicions are not fully formed. Acquiring knowledge in Northanger Abbey is a precarious process. As Catherine becomes more attentive to the surveilling gazes of men, Austen details her engagement with different sources of information. The narrator documents how the heroine interacts with and learns from various people with knowledge or deemed knowledgeable, and dramatizes the risks of depending on unreliable or inappropriate sources of information. In this second part of the episode, I consider how Austen illustrates the integral role of ignorance in the knowledge acquisition process by considering the novel's treatment of different sources of information and their perils. Evaluating the sources of our information and the integrity of our understanding is, of course, vital to any knowledge acquisition process, and almost always requires us to come to terms with our ignorances. What or sometimes how we do not know, at least not yet. Faculty at colleges and universities perpetually advise students to identify and engage good sources organize reliable data, and remain skeptical about unverified information. And of course, we now have access to vast quantities of information, good and bad. Electronic databases, generative AI, and the sheer availability of the internet have given us opportunities to locate massive amounts of material, almost immediately. The political extremism of our cultures has also severely complicated our abilities to access reliable and objective information. It has become far easier to locate biased, prejudiced, and skewed perspectives. It is, in other words, all too easy to hear, see, and read information that we already believe to be true. If we want access to data or ideas that align with our prejudices and entrenched beliefs, cable news and the internet are most happy to oblige. These cultural developments have, to say the very least, been challenging, even dangerous for and at times threatening to higher education, the work of scholarly research, and for anyone seeking accurate and reliable knowledge. In Northanger Abbey, General Tilney seeks more information about Catherine. And as he does so, he has specific goals in mind. He wants to know more about this young woman who has sparked the interest of his son, including more details about her family, her financial standing, and her associates, and he engages different sources. One night at the theater, after making arrangements for a future walk with Henry, Catherine observed with some surprise that John Thorpe was engaged in conversation with General Tilney. And she felt something more than surprise when she thought she could perceive herself the object of their attention and discourse. What could they have to say of her? Catherine again recognizes that men are looking at her in public spaces, and she asks questions, making what the narrator terms an anxious inquiry of Henry. How came Mr. Thorpe to know your father? She wants to know more, and while Henry knew nothing about it, he was ignorant, Thorpe willingly offers more. Austen even tells us that he prevented the inquiry, which had traveled from her heart almost to the tip of her tongue, by asking in a consequential manner whether she had seen him talking with General Tilney. Thorpe is quite eager to self-identify as a source of information, share details about his private conversation with the general, and elaborate on his supposed relationship with him. But what do you think we have been talking of? You, yes, by heavens, and the general thinks you the finest girl in Bath. In college, we learn that research requires work, especially in today's oversaturated information marketplace. If we want to find accurate and reliable information or effectively organized data, we have to put in some effort. It's a process. It takes time. Thorpe is all too excited to discuss his conversation with the general, their supposed long-standing relationship, and his purported opinion of the heroine as the finest girl in Bath. When people willingly share details of a private conversation, we learn to ask why and for what purpose. This is gossip, and gossip is volatile and almost always motivated. As the novel progresses, Catherine learns to scrutinize information sources, including gossip. But this is a process that involves ignorance. Austen ends this scene by communicating that General Tilney, instead of disliking, should admire her, was very delightful. The heroine is again affected by men's supposed admiration of her, an admiration about which she learns via the secondhand report of the arrogant and dangerous John Thorpe. And while she does begin to ask important questions, she neither challenges nor investigates Thorpe's claims at this point. Henry Tilney is a much better source of information for the heroine throughout the novel. Indeed, Henry often serves as Catherine's teacher, instructing her and at times correcting her on dress, language, metaphors for marriage, women's famous habit of keeping a journal, landscape and drawing, and of course, her misconceptions and exaggerations based on her reading of Gothic romances. When I spoke with Dr. Johnson, she was kind enough to read and discuss with me a specific passage that dramatizes some of the challenges Catherine navigates as she interacts with Henry as a source of information.
Henry loves her ignorance because he loves to teach her. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything evil about this, but that is sort of the dispensation. At one point, when he's talking about landscape design, you mentioned landscape in Radcliffe. It's there in Northanger Abbey too, and Catherine realizes she doesn't know anything about landscape theory. She was heartily ashamed of her ignorance, Austen writes, a misplaced shame. When people wish to attach, they should always be ignorant. To come with a well-informed mind is to come with an inability of administering to the vanity of others, which a sensible person would always wish to avoid, a woman especially, if she have the misfortune of knowing anything, should conceal it as well as she can. So the narrator there is not only talking about how to get Henry to love you. Well, let him pretend to be teaching you something. But she's also talking about her stance as a narrator. That knowledge is a misfortune, and you better shut up about it.
Dr. Johnson reminds us of both the relationship between ignorance and knowledge and the precarity and volatility of knowledge. Henry is a great source of knowledge, and Catherine no doubt learns from him. But she must also negotiate how to behave in the midst of a man with such vast knowledge. Austen tells us that she feels shame about her ignorance, but qualifies that it is a misplaced shame. Women have reasons for concealing their knowledge. Smart women who actively share ideas can intimidate men and women, and, as Austen notes, struggle to attach or garner admiration. The narrator suggests that they should instead be ignorant and administer to the vanity of others. Austen's language reminds me of the difficulties that young, hesitant college students encounter as they find themselves working and studying with people presumed to be knowledgeable, people who are presumed to be not ignorant. We have reasons for hiding our knowledge, not sharing our ideas, remaining quiet, or even feigning ignorance. And people who operate as great sources of information often like to have their vanities reinforced and their egos supported. These same people often dismiss individuals who challenge, complicate, or refute their knowledge as ignorant or prejudiced. As Dr. Johnson says, Henry likes to teach Catherine. He is attracted to her ignorance and takes advantage of various opportunities to expose her lack of knowledge and enhance his own status as one presumed to know. Henry offers one of his more memorable lessons when Catherine and Eleanor Tilney become confused about the forthcoming publication of a new book. At this moment, the heroine enthusiastically shares knowledge with Eleanor, reporting, "I have heard that something very shocking indeed will soon come out in London." Catherine knows neither the nature nor the author of this imminent something, and having only heard that it is to be more horrible than anything we have met with yet, cites a particular friend of mine who offered an account of it in a letter from London yesterday. Plenty of knowledge and plenty of ignorance here. But Austen's language also accentuates Catherine's learning process and her source material. And her source is rather reliable. Something very shocking indeed will soon come out in London. Perhaps many somethings. But as she communicates her knowledge, she creates confusion, reminding us of the perpetual challenges of interacting with and sharing source material. And she incites Henry's corrective explanation, who decides he should make the heroine and his sister understand each other rather than leaving them to puzzle out an explanation. He intervenes, denigrates Eleanor as my stupid sister who has mistaken all the heroine's clearest expressions, and announces that Catherine has been talking of nothing more dreadful than a new publication which is shortly to come out. Henry speaks with authority and operates as a rather obnoxious professor. He may be a rather reliable source of information who offers insightful comments, precise definitions of words, and lectures on aesthetic thought, but he's also ignorant and short-sighted, especially of alternative ways of knowing and understanding. He credits Catherine for offering the clearest expressions and insists that any rational creature could comprehend that such words could only relate to a circulating library, rather than riotous events in the capital, or government conspiracies, or unearthed treacheries in central England. But as we read Northanger Abbey, we learn that supposedly rational minds are inevitably incapable of explaining everything experienced by a young woman encountering public society for the first time, or understanding the complexities of difficult events or circumstances. And while Henry no doubt serves as a great source of knowledge, he fails to appreciate different ways of knowing or the possibility of events or phenomena escaping rational explanations. Still, after this incident, Austen writes, "It was no effort to Catherine to believe that Henry Tilney could never be wrong. She invests him with great authority, but he is not omniscient. And as Catherine learns to appreciate that even her teacher and lover has limited knowledge and methods of inquiry, she experiences pain and even shame." When I spoke with Susanna Fullerton, longtime president of the Jane Austen Society of Australia, she reflected on Catherine's naivete, but she also pointed to the heroine's ability to teach Henry.
And she's got good sense, she works out eventually who the good people are and how false Isabella is and how boorish John is. She's got good sense to guide her, but yes, she's very naive through much of the novel. And I think she has things to teach Henry as well. Even though Henry is older and thinks he's so much more sensible and mature, I think he learns from Catherine as well.
In the final section of the novel, as Catherine develops her suspicions that General Tilney has villainously murdered his wife, she makes irrational connections and arrives at quick conclusions without verifiable data. She also asks plenty of questions, conducts independent research, and investigates, all activities that we encourage our students to do. She looks for information to fill in gaps in her knowledge, and while she makes prominent mistakes, she also helps Henry and us as readers appreciate how our knowledge of people and the world around us may not always be clear, transparent, or derived from reliable sources. We learn in various ways from various sources, and such processes are most assuredly not limited to college courses. During her visit with the Tilneys at Northanger, Catherine often functions as though she were a detective investigating a mystery, even as she remains ignorant of prominent facts and details. I asked Francine Matthews to think about the role of ignorance in Northanger Abbey, and she reflected on its centrality to the classic mystery story, in which readers often know more, are less ignorant than the detectives who are investigating a crime. She also discussed with me how investigating, researching, and asking questions were integral parts of her own writing process as an author of mystery fiction.
What I found fascinating as a writer who has to do research is that I invariably get things wrong that I assumed I knew. If I know I am ignorant of something and actually go research it, I'm fine. It's the things I don't know to research because I think I understand them that I invariably get wrong. That's an object lesson in itself on a daily level for me. So it's always fascinating to put a book out, have someone write to you and say, "I'm sorry to tell you that on page 93 you mentioned a fowling piece," and as though it were a pistol. Well, a fowling piece is not a pistol.
Catherine makes all kinds of ignorant mistakes and assumptions because she does not ask enough questions or the appropriate questions or request clarifying details, but her ongoing investigation helps her to appreciate complexities, including surprising, unexpected, or even disturbing complexities of people and her world that may escape us if we proceed only as rational creatures. In Austen's conclusion, we learn that John Thorpe provided incorrect information about Catherine to General Tilney. He was a bad source. He was a gossip, and as I suggested earlier, gossip is usually motivated. The general's willingness to believe Thorpe's gossip without scrutinizing his motivations leads to complicated and legitimately dangerous consequences, especially for the heroine. When Henry's father discovers that Catherine is not as wealthy or connected as Thorpe initially presented her, she is abruptly sent home without explanation or accompaniment. The heroine does not know or understand the reasons for her sudden dismissal. She is ignorant of Thorpe's schemes, and her departure from Northanger is painful and frustrating. As we keep discovering, the knowledge process can be difficult. In this third and concluding part of the episode, we briefly consider the danger and efficacy of assumptions that we create in our knowledge formation process. Because we learn through a process, and because we fundamentally can't know everything all at once, we remain ignorant of so many issues and ideas. It happens. Our ignorances frame our learning as we ask questions, speculate, develop relationships, and rely upon biases and prejudices. We inevitably form assumptions based on incomplete knowledge. Again, we just can't know everything. I spoke with Dr. Jennifer Closter, a Melbourne-based scholar and writer, about the role of ignorance in Northanger Abbey, and she pointed to this relationship between our biases and our knowledge processes.
We all have our biases and our foibles, and mostly they're based on ignorance, I would say. And we can choose or not choose to become less ignorant, to become more knowledgeable.
It takes time to acquire knowledge, and even then, there's just so much to know, so many biases to confront, so many complications to navigate. This is a fundamental feature of education. As we become more knowledgeable, we discover how much more there is to know, how many ridiculously smart people there are out there, and ultimately that there are truly so many different ways of knowing or becoming knowledgeable. In Northanger Abbey, Austen demonstrates how Catherine and others both form assumptions, beliefs, or ideas accepted as true or appropriate with limited evidence, and act on such assumptions. Austen documents the dangers of such assumptions and suggests the potential efficacy or value of such limited or ongoing knowledge that we are still in the process of developing. As I have already mentioned, Catherine, during her time at Northanger, quickly becomes convinced that the general has murdered his deceased wife. She forms this conclusion on very limited evidence. He did not talk about her or want to tour her chambers. His wife's illness was very sudden. Members of the family were away at the time of her death, etc., etc. She has quite simply insufficient data to support her findings. And yet, the narrator writes, Catherine attempted no longer to hide from herself the nature of the feelings which, in spite of all her attentions, he had previously excited. And what had been terror and dislike before was now absolute aversion. Yes, aversion. His cruelty to such a charming woman made him odious to her. She had often read of such characters. Catherine reflects on the terror, absolute aversion, and cruelty she now directly associates with the general. And because she had often read of such characters, later compares his behavior with the air and attitude of a Montoni, the infamous villain of Radcliffe's Mysteries of Udolpho. Catherine's mind moves quickly to form assumptions. When the general stays up late at night, supposedly because he has many pamphlets to finish, she is certain there must be some deeper cause. Something was to be done only while the household slept, and the probability that Mrs. Tilney yet lived, shut up for causes unknown, was the conclusion which necessarily followed. Later, after observing the family memorial to Mrs. Tilney at church, the narrator notes that Catherine has read too much not to be perfectly aware of the ease with which a waxen figure might be introduced and a supposititious funeral carried on. The heroine forms conclusions based on her reading of Gothic fiction, limited empirical data, and questionable information from ostensibly reliable sources. Nonetheless, Catherine becomes convinced that the general has committed horrible atrocities, and this prompts her to make her memorable secret trip to the apartment of Mrs. Tilney to investigate, the same area of the Abbey that the general avoided on their earlier tour. The narrator tells us, Catherine had expected to have her feelings worked, and worked they were. Austen's language again reminds us of the arduous process of acquiring knowledge. Like many college students, Catherine has her feelings worked when she experiences new knowledge. At times, the knowledge acquisition process can be an absolutely overwhelming experience. For Catherine, it's quite painful and embarrassing. When Henry surprisingly enters the room from an unknown staircase, Catherine shares her in-process speculations about his deceased mother and father. Her dying so suddenly, and you, none of you being at home, and your father, I thought perhaps, had not been very fond of her. As Henry clarifies the details of her mother's passing, he also assures the heroine that you have erred in supposing him not attached to her. He loved her, as well as it was possible for him to do, and, if not permanently, he was truly afflicted by her death. When Catherine immediately responds, I am very glad of it, Henry realizes something of the extent of the heroine's suspicions and initiates what may be his most memorable lecture. If I understand you rightly, you have formed a surmise of such horror as I have hardly words to. Dear Miss Morland, consider the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained. What have you been judging from? Remember the country and the age in which we live. Remember that we are English, that we are Christians. Consult your own understanding, your own sense of the probable, your own observation of what is passing around you. Does our education prepare us for such atrocities? Do our laws connive at them? Could they be perpetrated without being known in a country like this, where social and literary intercourse is on such a footing, where every man is surrounded by a neighborhood of voluntary spies, and where roads and newspapers lay everything open? Dearest Miss Morland, what ideas have you been admitting? Henry chides the heroine for her imaginative speculations about his father, speculations based upon assumptions and rooted in few empirical observations. He chastises her for jumping to irrational conclusions, the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained, and charges her to remember the country and the age in which we live, that we are English, that we are Christians. Henry's language reminds us of his dependence on steadiness of reason and echoes his insistence that any rational creature must arrive at clarity of understanding. The heroine has no doubt been admitting ideas with little evidence to support them, and Henry charges her to remember that such horrifying, awful, Gothic events simply don't happen in England amongst Christian people in modern times. Austen importantly opens the next chapter by telling us the visions of romance were over. Catherine was completely awakened. She reflects, in the central part of England, there was surely some security for the existence even of a wife not beloved. Murder was not tolerated. Servants were not slaves. Austen describes Catherine as a reformed, awakened, educated heroine, presumably no longer affected by the sensations of Gothic fiction. She is now convinced that central England is neither littered with villains, nor haunted by secret terrors, nor riddled with mysteries to be solved. And then she is sent home, unceremoniously and without explanation. When Elinor tells the heroine that she is to leave the Abbey, she notes that explanation and apology are equally impossible. I cannot attempt either. Catherine is left ignorant of the reason for her dismissal, and this ignorance is painful. She is to leave the following morning. We learn that not even the hour is left to her choice. The very carriage is ordered and will be here at 7 o'clock, and no servant will be offered. Eleanor adds, a journey of 70 miles to be taken post by you, at your age, alone, unattended. As readers of Northanger Abbey, we don't yet know why Catherine has been sent home. We may have our suspicions or speculations, but we don't know. This happens rather quickly, and the heroine's own reflections make clear the startling and discomforting effect of her departure. From what it could arise and where it would end were considerations of equal perplexity and alarm. The manner in which it was done, so grossly uncivil, hurrying her away without any reference to her own convenience. Catherine's ignorance is unnerving, even dangerous. Notably, her ignorance prompts her to speculate that she must have had the misfortune to offend the general. She effectively blames herself as she prepares for this precarious journey. In the final pages of the novel, Henry Tilney explains to Catherine that John Thorpe first misled the general about Catherine's financial standing and then later confirmed that such reports were false. Thorpe was truly a bad source of information, and his bad information has endangered the heroine, leading the general to aggressively court her favor, and later, when he realized she was not as wealthy as Thorpe initially presented her, to rudely dismiss her from Northanger, forcing her to travel 70 miles alone. Austen allows Henry to explain these details to the heroine and to us as readers. Dr. Johnson spoke with me about how Catherine processes this knowledge of which she had previously been ignorant.
And the novel actually tells us that her suspicions were justified, that she is actually quite wrong in having suspected the general of murder, but that she is actually right in considering him, in a metaphorical sense, murderous. And the novel is actually quite explicit about this. In the final chapter, we learn that in suspecting General Tilney of either murdering or shutting up his wife, she had scarcely sinned against his character or magnified his cruelty. Yes, she did exaggerate them, but scarcely exaggerated them. You know, actually the people in charge of the country, can't be trusted, altogether. That they don't have good motives.
As educators, we are often tempted to create a definitive line between knowledge and ignorance, fact and fiction, assumptions and data. And we have plenty of good reasons for doing so, no doubt. Catherine makes all sorts of mistakes throughout Northanger Abbey, some rather foolish mistakes. She makes and acts on assumptions that are ill-founded. She is shown to be ignorant of and deficient in all kinds of knowledge. This has been a difficult process for her. And at this crucial moment, Austen writes about knowledge with great nuance. Her heroine acknowledges that in suspecting General Tilney of either murdering or shutting up his wife, she had scarcely sinned against his character or magnified his cruelty. She was wrong about the general. He did not kill his wife or lock her up in some damp cell in central England, but after what she has learned about the general through her various knowledge acquisition processes, she recognizes that she has only scarcely sinned against his character or magnified his cruelty. As Dr. Johnson indicates, he's not a leader we should trust, and as a young woman, Catherine comes to terms with this. Indeed, we might think of Catherine's ability to engage ignorance, negotiate various sources of information, and come to terms with different ways of knowing as truly heroic, an accomplishment worthy of a heroine. Her ignorance has been painful, embarrassing, even shameful, but she learns, and learning is risky business. As we know, politicians and pundits have engaged in ongoing attacks on higher education, and many of these attacks, no doubt, take aim at the humanities. These politicians, pundits, and some parents often speak about knowledge as if it belonged to some miraculous, nostalgic world in which ideas were fixed and objective, data were somehow pure, and learning were simple. In Northanger Abbey, Austen shows us that the knowledge acquisition process is far more complicated, far more painful, and far more interesting. Dr. Patricia A. Matthews spoke with me about Austen's novel as a model for and a defense of various ways of learning, thinking, and knowing.
And also just the idea that this is a process that takes time. You always hear the medical doctor or the engineer or the lawyer who talks about the poetry class that helped them understand the work that they were trying to do. And so I think that Austen's defense of the novel is actually a defense of imagination, and it's a defense of leisure, and a defense of the time when people get to be in their own heads without having to perform for other people.
We learn in all kinds of ways, and our education continues perpetually. We come to know through processes of discovery, observation, interaction, and engagement. These are iterative and recursive processes that take time and require practice, and that inevitably involve ignorance. When we learn, we don't always immediately become more vocal, assertive, or active. At times, enhancing our knowledge prompts us to listen more effectively, to become more patient, maybe even to become more reticent. As we learn in Northanger Abbey, developing knowledge can hurt, and one of the fundamental reasons for this pain is that developing knowledge involves and at times exposes our ignorance. And when we expose our ignorance, we often learn features about ourselves, other people, and the world about which, at times, we would have preferred to remain ignorant. After all, people in the world are complicated. And knowledge, as Catherine Morland and the Humanities show us, is risky business. Thank you very much for joining me in this episode. In the next episode, due out at the end of July, I will turn to Sense and Sensibility to discuss the second humanities experience that Jane Austen's stories help us to appreciate and value: the messiness of human relationships.